Wild. So, I'm Rachel. That's me. I'm one of the geos at Kinross, Echo Bay. If you're driving north towards Curlew, we're kind of the building on the left-hand side that has about 1 million square-shaped pallets that are covered in black bags. All of those are core boxes. Some of you might know some of the folks in here. We've got quite a few locals. Like that? Sounds good. Brittany Swink is part of our team. She's born and raised here. Justin Wilson, he's been around forever. Allison Nush, she's also born and raised. The rest of us are kind of transplants at this point, but we make a pretty good team. If you see any of us around town or anything, you have rock questions, say hi. We love rocks. If I look at it seriously. That's okay, we will use the mouse. Okay, so being in mining, every meeting that we have starts with a safety share. So y'all are subjected to that because I'm giving a talk, so you need a safety share. So everyone knows the general. When you're using tools like hammers and picks and chisels and all of those things, you need to wear proper eye protection, safety glasses, gloves, closed-toed shoes. I won't tell you you have to protect your toes with safety toes and metatarsal protection, but you should probably do that too. Something that not a lot of people think of, though, that is very much a concern is if you're anything like me and you're super happy-go-lucky and having a fun time and you're out hitting rocks and you're like, this is great, and you're smiling and your mouth is open while you are wailing on things. Don't do that. I know a couple people who have actually chipped their front teeth with rock shrapnel. Teeth are really expensive to fix. If you are hammering, close your mouth. So, what are we planning on doing during my little spiel here? We're going to get a basic idea of where did the rocks that we see today come from, whether they're rocks in your yard or the gravel that's next to Curlew Lake, and what have you. We're going to talk about what stratigraphy is and what our stratigraphy is and why it matters. We're going to learn some indicators to tell us where we are in stratigraphy. And we're going to do a little bit of where the fossils are and how they form, because I do rocks, not fossils. But it's all part of the geologic history of the area. So we're going way back, just for a little bit, though. So once upon a time, Earth was Pangea. Y'all have probably heard about Pangea. And then plates move around. So the Earth is made up very similarly to, where's my pointer, to human skull. It is not just one solid bone. It is a whole bunch of different plates that fuse together over time. When you're born, those aren't fused together yet. Your head's pretty dang squishy. And then over time, all those plates fuse. So the way that our continents are is not the way that they used to be. It's the same thing of as plates kind of move around, sometimes they subduct or get underneath each other, they split apart, and then lava comes up and makes more rock. It's a very mobile thing. I mean, it's not like plates are moving like miles a day or anything. We're talking like a centimeter or two a year at most in some places. But that's kind of what this is, just a general idea of pretty much everything before what we're going to start talking about. Plates are just moving around, and kind of how we know where plates once were is in this figure. You see, pretend all of these little plates, they're moving around, they're really like chunks of plates. Based on sediments and fossils and things like that found on these plates, even though now they're way up here and have accreted onto us, or basically stuck onto the side of us, we know that they once were way down here because they match the same kind of mineralization and fossils and sediments as this region. So that's kind of how you can slowly piece back together where plates originated, where they ended up, all the stops along the way of what they hit. So, subduction has been happening a lot more than just 100 million years ago, but that's when the important, for us, subduction started happening. So, in the top figure, you see early Cretaceous times. We have the oceanic plate subducting below what we're just going to call North America. It's not really North America yet, but it's the North America-ish that we know. We here in Republic are roughly the yellow star. And so as oceanic plate is subducting, everything on top of it is also trying to come down. What happens, though, is it all gets kind of scraped off by our continent. And so I have this nice little picture here of guy scraping the wax off of his surfboard so he can re-wax it and do all of those things. But if we, kind of the United States or North America, are the credit card, and surfboard is the oceanic crust, then as it is going underneath of us, we are basically scraping off all of the gunk that's on top of it, whether it is continents or sediments or what have you. And that makes our accretionary complex, where more things just keep getting stuck and stuck and stuck onto the side of us as the crust is subducting below us. So, kind of, it's not quite where all our volcanic rocks came from, but we'll talk about it just because it all together works together. So as you have wet oceanic crust subducting below us, that moisture creates what's called hydration melting. Kind of like if you guys have ever used pot holders, right? You have something hot on your stove, you use pot holders, you move the pot, it's fine. Pot holders will heat up eventually, right? But it's not that bad. If you accidentally get your pot holders wet and then use them, it is hot. They do not insulate you from the heat anymore. And that's basically what happens is these rocks, even though they're really, really cold because they've been on the ocean floor, because they have moisture, that moisture comes up, and because now there is water involved, you get volcanoes. But have no fear, we are farther inland. We don't have this problem. So this is where our story here, at least what we're concerned with, really starts. Kind of 56 to 49 million years ago, we start having some serious volcanic activity. This isn't actually caused by hydration melting. This is caused by decompression melting. So as your oceanic plate is subducting, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. That's fine. The problem is while we are accreting all of this, the stress pushing kind of from west towards the east starts making mountains. And so you can see underneath of us, we start getting these little wedges forming because as the earth is basically running into itself, we start slowly smushing. What happens is kind of like an iceberg, right? So you know when you see an iceberg, there's a little bit that sticks out above the top of the water, but there's way more that is below the water that you can't see because of buoyancy and all of those things. Rocks are the exact same way. So when you start building mountains on the surface, you're also building mountains below the surface. So then what happens is those rocks that are not used to intense temperatures and pressures, they get smushed down even closer to the mantle in the core where temperature is high and pressure is high, and they start melting. And just like how hot air rises, hot liquid rocks also rise. And so that's where a lot of our volcanism came from. Both the Sampoil and the Klondike. What happens with this, though, is either the magma reaches the surface, comes out as lava, you have a volcano, or it doesn't make it all the way. So you have what are these migmatite domes, or we call them gneiss domes because they're not nice like N-I-C-E, nice like the rock gneiss. You have these domes that are kind of like, for lack of better words, like earth pimples or like earth boils. They try coming up to the surface, and then they don't really make it, and they just solidify there. And while that's all fine and cool because they're dealing with the stresses, and they're like, okay, because I'm stressed, I need to go up and out, and everything's fine, that creates a lot of stress in our local environment. So when you have these domes starting to form, they are coming up, right? Well, the land in between them does not have anything to support itself. There's nothing underneath here telling it, like, yes, you can go up. And so as all of this is trying to rise, you end up forming a graben with faults on both sides, graben, basin, whatever you want to call it. But that's kind of the gist of gneiss domes are trying to do their thing, and they do because they are large and in charge, but this graben just falls because he doesn't have the support that he needs to continue going up. So this figure on the right is actually our graben area. So west of us here, we have the Okanagan Ice Dome, and then east of us, we have the Kettle Dome. What started as 2 small grabens, kind of trying to compensate for all of that extra upward pressure, then eventually turned into one larger graben, that is the Republic Graben. It goes, we say Republic, it goes all the way up into Curlew, it touches Canada. Like, this is a large area that is influenced by these 2 massive domes. So the important part for stone rows and for fossils and all of that is when you get this graben, you get a lake, because this is now the low zone where things can flow. Oh, lost the mouse. Okay, so around 49 million years ago, that's the date that we at Kinross use for Klondike. Stone rows people might be different. That's totally fine. We can agree to disagree. Depending on who you have run all of your age dating, you're going to end up with 15 different numbers anyway. General, this is ish when Sandpoil ended and Klondike started happening. So you see in this figure, we have our gneiss domes or mountains, whatever you want to think of them as, and then you have this low-lying area in the middle where your lake has formed. Over time, you have water coming down the edges of these high points, carrying with them all of the sediments down into the lake. Yes?
You mentioned Sandpoil and Klondike. Are those events, ages? What?
Units. We'll get there. So in kind of the middle of the freshwater lake, you have these dark units, muds. On the sides, you have more sandy stuff, coarser clasts, because they haven't had as much time to get all the way into the gentle water that is the lake. Out here is a lot more dynamic, is subjected to the rain and the wind and all of the storms that come through. And so gradually all of these sediments erode off of the sides of the mountains and end up filling your basin. So then, after all of these sediments come in, we have more volcanism. We're not going to talk about that because we already talked about that, and glaciers are cooler. So we have more volcanic events that kind of top up off the Klondike, and then things are pretty mellow for a little bit, until it gets really cold. And as recently as 15,000 years ago, this area was under glacial cover. So here we are looking up. So north is up here. Town is basically right over here along the Sandpoil River. This is Scatter Creek to take you out to Swan Lake. This right here is McMahon Creek to take you up and wander around and play in the forest. And here you can see beautiful U-shaped valley. So glaciers make U-shaped valleys. Rivers make V-shaped valleys, if you didn't know. And also, all of these nice hills are rounded off. Glaciers don't leave behind nice pointy mountains like you see in the Rockies. So when you have glacier advancing, it's basically scraping up everything that is in its path. Big bulldozer just trucks along and takes whatever it wants. As it slowly starts receding or melting or what have you, the thinnest parts melt first. So kind of up here, the thickest parts melt last, makes sense. And so what happens is you have raveling of all of your sediments that are caught in your ice up here, and as it melts, they all fall down, and they end up back on the ice. And so you have what are called lateral moraines that kind of go along the sides of the glacier, where all of your sediments end up getting deposited, as well as in the center. But Sandpoil came along and took away most of those. But so you can see kind of this bench that continues all the way to Republic, as well as this side where you have that break between these are glacial sediments and now you're back into bedrock. You can go up here and see glacial striations. I was talking to Travis. He has glacial striations. He's seen them. Like, you can have areas that have been glaciated that don't have a ton of sediments on top of them. Those sediments just ended up going where the water went down into the glacier. So, to me, because I live over here, it's wild to think that literally all of that was glacier, but not even all of that, because all of this was glaciated too. What I've read says basically a kilometer above this was all glaciated. So this is all fine and dandy, but why do we care? Because I know you guys are here for fossils and not really geology and all of that. But this is a geologic map of the Republic area, and so knowing everything that we just went through, it all leads back to this, and then we'll get to where it ties to fossils. We are the star, as always. Obviously, there's a lot of different colors. This is not an abstract painting. This is one guy, Musig, I think this is Musig's map. He hiked around for a few days, took a whole bunch of samples, made a map. Okay, cool. The important part of any geologic map, or really any map, is the legend. So the way that legends work on geologic maps is your youngest unit is on top. So in this case, this yellow business, that is your like sands, gravel, the dirt in your driveway. Like that is that, where you can't see the rocks and you have no clue what the rocks are. As you move down, rocks get older. All we really care about for right now and for this though is Sandpoil volcanics, and then you have Tom Thumb Tuff, and then you have the rest of the Klondike. We'll talk about that with stratigraphy. So how do you actually use this thing, and why does it matter? Really all this does is say, if you are here, this is what kind of rock you should be in. Take it with a grain of salt though, it definitely isn't always the case, because it is not like to make this map, they scraped all of the dirt off of all of these areas. But so, why do we care about rocks and why do we care about geologic maps? It gives us stratigraphy. Stratigraphy is basically just the order of the rock units based on age, kind of like if you had a layer cake and you cut a chunk out of your layer cake and pulled it back, you can see all the different layers. So the idea is if you can figure out where you are in stratigraphy, at anywhere you are, then you have a better idea of where to go looking for fossils. Or in my case, gold. So the rocks we care about, the rocks I care about, are the Sandpoil rocks, okay? Basically all volcanics. There's a little bit of sediments, not much. We've got andesites and biotite-rich things and feldspar-rich things. They're just minerals that are mixed into the volcanics that make them different-ish. The interesting things, though, are at the top of the Sandpoil, still on our side, not on the Klondike side yet, we have silica sinter, which is kind of like, it's not a vein. It's like there was once a lake that was super saturated in silica, or quartz, and slowly that precipitated out. The interesting thing is that is one of the few places in the Sandpoil where you can find fossils. They're not going to be anything amazing. They're mostly just like reed stems. Every once in a while you get some sort of, I don't know, little pieces of what looks like maybe they were bark. I don't do fossils, I'm sorry, I don't know, but it definitely looks like it was alive once. Immediately above the silica sinter, though, that's where we have an unconformity. That's where we draw the line between this is Sandpoil and this is Klondike, because there was obviously some sort of age gap that allowed things to be weathered away. So you have your carbonaceous mudstone. We call it the paleosurface because that's kind of the cap to the rocks that we care about. Immediately above that, you have epiclastic rocks. That's just a different way of saying sedimentary. You have more mudstones, and then you enter the large sequence of more volcanic rocks. So, if you can figure out where you are, because ideally you want to be somewhere in Klondike epiclastics, right? How do you do that? Well, here we have sinter. Like I said, it's on the Sandpoil side, indicates fluid outflow at the surface, so you know that this was what the surface was at that point. They have beds. Usually they're really wiggly. They're really messed up because if you think like turbulent waters, silica starts precipitating, and then as waves or whatever move it, it kind of chunks it up a little bit. But then it also has reed casts. So all of these little circly guys were originally reeds or fronds or whatever plant in water variety that you like. The basal Klondike mudstone is really easy to identify. It is black. If it's not black, it is really, really, really dark brown. It's extremely carbonaceous, like to the point where you have real coal seams. Nothing that you could heat your house with. It's like maybe a millimeter or two at a time, but really, really carbonaceous, very brittle. In between bedding planes is usually very polished. And so if you run into this, you know, hey, I'm at, like, this is the base of the Klondike. This was 49 million years ago. This is pretty cool. The next best thing you can do is, if you don't already know, familiarize yourself with the difference between volcanic rocks and sedimentary rocks. Volcanic rocks are individual mineral grains that grow together, okay? Which you might need a hand lens for this. You can always come into my office and we'll help you too. But sedimentary rocks, though, are individual little grains of different things that have been cemented together. They generally have little spaces in between the little grains. They can be a variety of sizes. They often have beds or layers. Igneous rocks or volcanic rocks are usually pretty hard. Sedimentary rocks, you can usually break pretty well, and they usually have layers that they like to break upon. So if you find yourself in volcanic rocks, you are not going to find the fossils, I'm sorry, because you are either way too high in the Klondike or you are way too low in the Sandpoil. So where are the fossils anyway? Because that's what you came here for, right? So all of the rocks that are cool to me but not as cool to you guys, rocks that are also not really cool to anybody because there's not really much of anything in them, the cool rocks with the fossils. So at the Stone Rose Boot Hill site, where there are many a fossil, you have this nice strat column that goes between different sandstones, mudstones, shales. If you find yourself in the carbonaceous, like black or dark brown mud, you're probably not going to see really great fossils. You might see some, but it's not going to be what you would other places. It's so dark because all of the fossils that could have been there ended up basically turning into organic material, completely falling apart. They are what is making the carbonaceous mud black. It's kind of like, if you're in the middle of a lake, that's where all of the mud settles to, right? Because it's most gentle out there. You don't have bugs flying in the middle of a lake. They hang out on the edges, right? You don't have trees growing in the middle of a lake. They hang out on the edges. So by the time you get material so fine that it is mud and that carbon rich, it's just not the great home for fossils to live. Yeah, they can be there, but it's not ideal. What you really want is interbedded sands and muds. It kind of indicates a much more dynamic environment. Water is flowing fast enough to move the sediments. You're able to basically trap whatever you're trying to fossilize with a large amount of sediments quickly so that it doesn't have time to immediately decay and get broken up into a billion pieces and whatnot. So you want calm, like not volcanoes, gentler times, but also pretty dynamically changing environment where you have a lot of sediments moving and a lot of water flowing to be able to get those sediments where you need them. So how do fossils become fossils? You can have the preserved remains, which is basically whatever it is that you're fossilizing gets stuck within something else, like amber. There's permineralization, where your pore spaces are filled with some other mineral, like calcite. There's molds and casts, where basically organism gets trapped in sediments, sediments turn to rock, eventually organism decays away, leaves an impression within the rock, so you have a mold. If something else comes in, like more sediments or minerals or what have you, and fills that mold, then you have a cast. Replacement is really similar to permineralization. It's just way more intense. Instead of just filling some of the pore spaces, you are removing everything that was originally there and replacing it with a new mineral. Those usually look really cool. And then you have compression, which is what I believe most of the fossils here are, where you have fine sediment repeatedly depositing on top of whatever it is that is trying to be fossilized. As that decomposes, it leaves behind kind of a little bit of carbon and whatever organic material was in there, and you have basically smushed whatever is there in a sandwich, and you have fossil. That's kind of the easiest way to make fossils. I mean, in my opinion, I haven't made any. So, in conclusion, we like rocks. Hopefully you're not like me, where you literally do have pockets full of rocks some days. But y'all like rocks too. Yeah. So I hope kind of out of all of this, you have some sort of idea now of where the rocks came from, why we kind of care. Maybe you don't care, but at least now if you are somewhere, you have an idea of, hey, here's where I am in the time scale. this isn't where I should be looking for fossils. I'm not going to waste my time here. I'm going to go look for crystals instead. Or maybe you end up over here and you're like, oh, I am in the right unit. This is where I could look for fossils. I'm going to look for fossils instead of look for crystals. That sort of thing. Do we have questions? Yes. Wow. There are quite a few creeks that you could go play around in and potentially pant for gold. I'm not saying that I have, but I'm saying that there is gold in some creeks. We can talk after. Any other questions? Oh, you first.
Say again the company you work for?
Kinross Echo Bay.
How do you spell that?
Kinross is Kinross. No problem. And Echo Bay is kind of a subsidiary of Kinross. It's like Kinross's mother company, but they own a bunch of other companies. So while I represent Kinross and our office is a Kinross office, I get paid by Echo Bay, if that makes any sense. It's all the same thing. Kinross.
Yeah, so what you presented tonight, I do think everyone about the geology of this area, because roadside geology of Washington and some other geologists I know said that most of the gold over here was deep sea thermal vents, which apparently is not.
No.
That
No, no.
Kelly Range was prolific, but it's nice instead of having dry, it's fine. And that there was a cap on top of that range that slowly slid off all the way to the west. So none of that is true.
I don't like that they called it granite, but when you metamorphose granite, it makes nice. So at least they're like cousins.
I assume that this is a big background, but it was not.
Mm-mm.
It was near the surface than a background.
Yes. So our gold here in veins at least is all low sulfidation epithermal. It's within usually the first the top 600 or so feet of the sandpoil.
But it was thermal, just not related to deep sea vents.
No, yes, it was not related to deep sea vents. We think it's mostly related to the fluids and heat coming off of the gneiss domes as they were coming up. Just because the timing between the two of them is pretty much hand in hand.
That push from the surface due to the intrusion.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any of the peaks in the kettle or the local mountains that you suspect were above the ice?
Probably. I haven't thought enough. What are you?
Well, I did.
No, he behind you. You think that there's mountains?
There are some, so vegetationally, there are some indicators that some of that areas were above, and you would look primarily for sagebrush, primarily sagebrush. So I think Copper Butte and Madeline, do you remember?
No.
There are a couple, and I don't remember what they were, and that would be probably the most recent glaciation, so the different episodes that probably was all glaciated, because it is pretty rounded.
That makes sense. Anybody else? No? Okay, cool. Well, if you've got questions about rocks, bring them by. We're almost always there. We really like rocks. Don't bring us fossils. We will not help you. We will send you here. But if you have a basic idea of where it came from, we will give you our best idea of what it is and if it's worth anything and if we think it's cool.